My name is Molly Bryan. Pull up a chair, make yourself a cup of coffee, and let's talk. I want to ask you a question before we even get into the heavy stuff. Type the word boundaries in the comments right now if you have ever been asked to completely set your own soul on fire just to keep someone else warm. If you have ever been treated like your entire life, your body, and your achievements were just a resource for your family to harvest, then you know exactly what kind of dynamic we are dealing with today. Let's start where the illusion finally broke. I was sitting on the cold, white tile of my parents' guest bathroom floor. I was 8 months pregnant. My left cheek was actively throbbing, hot and heavy, and when I looked in the mirror, I could already see the faint, dark outline of 4 fingers settling into my skin. Outside that locked door, the house was perfectly quiet, except for the polite, rhythmic clinking of silver forks against wedding china. My mother was serving her roast chicken. My sister was sitting straight-backed. My father was pouring his bourbon. They were carrying on as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just looked at me and said, "Molly, this baby isn't yours to keep. Vanessa earned her. You owe this family." And as if, when I whispered the word no, my own mother hadn't reached across the table and slapped me so hard, my head snapped sideways, sending my pregnant belly into the sharp, varnished edge of the mahogany table before I hit the hardwood floor. I sat on that closed toilet seat, my hands trembling as I cradled my stomach, waiting for the only indicator that mattered. I counted. 1, 2, 3. At 4, she kicked. A sharp, defiant little nudge against my ribs. The baby was okay. And in that exact moment, sitting beneath a framed Bible verse that read, "Honor thy mother." A verse my mother had hung with clinical precision. The last remaining thread of guilt inside me snapped. I didn't call my husband, Owen, first because I knew he would panic, and I needed an absolute shield, not a panic attack. I scrolled past 911. I stopped at the one man who had been quietly holding the missing pieces of my life for 3 years. My father-in-law, Pastor Conrad Bryan. He answered on the second ring. His voice wasn't panicked. It was a steady, low rumble. I didn't cry. I just whispered, "I'm at my parents' house. In the bathroom." "She hit me, Pastor. I need you here. With everything you kept." There was a long pause on the line. I could hear him taking 3 deep, deliberate breaths. When he spoke, he didn't give a sermon. He just said, "Molly, I've been waiting 3 years for you to ask. Do not tell anyone in that house I am coming." You see, for 29 years, I believed I was the problem. I believed that if I was just a little more patient, a little more accommodating, a little more invisible, my mother would finally see me as a daughter instead of a buffer for my sister's desires. But as I unlocked that door and walked back out into that suffocating dining room, I realized something that changed the entire trajectory of my life. Some families don't want you. They just want what you can produce for them. If you stay until the end of this story, I promise you, I will show you exactly how one quiet, systematic asset audit can completely dismantle a lifetime of emotional tyranny. Let's look at how we got to that table in the first place. To understand the absolute certainty with which my mother lifted her hand against me at that dinner table, you have to understand the psychological architecture of the house I grew up in. It was a beautifully staged 4-bedroom colonial in Lake Oswego, Oregon, a town where the lawns are hyper-manicured and the family secrets are buried deep beneath layers of social prestige. My father ran a highly successful cosmetic dental practice on A Avenue, and my mother was a top-tier luxury real estate broker. They were experts in selling an image. They were masters of the facade. There were exactly 28 photographs hanging on the long, wood-paneled wall of the hallway that led from the kitchen to my parents' master bedroom. I know the exact number because I counted them when I was 8, again when I was 12, and one final time when I was 16, searching for some proof that I existed in their layout. 23 of those beautifully framed photographs were of my sister, Vanessa. 2 were of me alone. 1 was the 2 of us together, and the remaining 2 were standard, stiff family portraits, taken on the steps of the First United Methodist Church on Easter mornings. My single first-grade school portrait. The one where my hair was slightly cowlicked and my smile was too wide, didn't make the main hallway. It hung on the back staircase wall, right by the heavy door that led down into the unfinished basement where guests rarely went. The first time my mother explicitly defined my role in the family ledger, I was only 10 years old. I remember it with absolute clarity. She was standing in the kitchen, her diamond rings catching the morning light as she gently untangled Vanessa's long, blonde hair before her piano lesson. She looked over her shoulder at me, smiled that bright, transactional smile she usually reserved for open houses, and said, "Vanessa is the easy one, Molly. You're the one who teaches me patience." For years, I actually thought that was a compliment. I thought teaching my mother patience meant I possessed a quiet, resilient strength. I didn't realize until much later that "you teach me patience" was simply code for "you require effort to love, and your sister does not." Vanessa was the performer. She took classical piano from the age of 6 and gave a massive recital at the Newmark Theater in downtown Portland when she was 14. My father booked the entire front row. My mother bought a custom designer dress for the occasion that she still managed to bring up in conversation a decade later. I didn't play an instrument. I wrote stories. I started pouring my heart into notebooks when I was 6, the exact same year Vanessa started piano. When I was 15, I won a major regional writing prize for an essay I had submitted to a contest run by the Oregon Council of Teachers of English. The formal awards dinner was on a Friday night in May. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed in my best dress, waiting for my mother to finish getting ready. Instead, she walked into my room while on the phone with a high-end salon, looked at me with that vacant, polite real estate smile, and said, "Sweetheart, you understand, don't you? Your sister's hair appointment had to be moved twice, and she has absolutely no one to style it for her recital prep. You don't mind if I skip tonight, do you?" My English teacher ended up driving me to the banquet. She sat in the empty chair my mother was supposed to occupy, and she clapped the loudest when they read my name. When I came home that night, holding my gold-embossed certificate, I walked into the kitchen. My mother didn't ask to see it. She just looked up from her paperwork and said, "Your sister had no one, Molly. You understand." I quietly walked upstairs, folded that certificate into a tiny square, and hid it in the absolute bottom drawer of my nightstand. It stayed buried there for 14 years, a physical reminder that my achievements were only valuable if they didn't inconvenience Vanessa's spotlight. By the time I was 17, Vanessa's schedule was the axis around which the entire household rotated. She was homecoming queen, president of the Spanish club, and an intern at a Portland design firm. I was preparing my honors thesis on Toni Morrison, and my mother constantly demanded I skip my mandatory library study sessions because "your sister has a thing, Molly, and we need you to handle the domestic overflow." When I defended my thesis in the second week of May, I gave it to a completely empty room, save for my English teacher and the school principal. My family wasn't there. My sister had a thing. If you've ever had to learn how to be entirely self-contained because the people who brought you into this world couldn't find the time to look at you, type the word "seen" in the comments right now. Because let me tell you, the erasure didn't stop when we grew up. In the spring of 2025, my father retook the large family portrait that hung inside the brass frame on his clinic door. I was 3 months pregnant at the time, and I wasn't even told about the photo shoot. I found out when I drove past Peton Family Dentistry on a Saturday afternoon and saw the new sign. I had been completely cropped out, replaced by a wider angle of Vanessa's perfect piano recital smile. When I asked the receptionist, she awkwardly told me my father said I had moved. I hadn't moved. I had just stopped answering his passive calls 2 months prior. They didn't miss me, they just adjusted the frame. The only reason I didn't lose my mind during those cold, erasing years was because I met Owen Bryan. We crossed paths in October of 2020 at a small, crowded coffee shop in Northeast Portland. He was reading a column, completely absorbed, and accidentally knocked my entire ceramic mug right off the table. The handle chipped, and he spent the next 20 minutes blushing, stammering, and trying to apologize. He was so human, so entirely without a facade. 6 years later, that exact chipped mug still sits on our kitchen windowsill in West Lynn, a monument to the day my real life actually began. When Owen introduced me to his parents, Conrad and Beatrice Bryan, I experienced what a real family felt like for the very first time. They lived in a modest, warm home in Beaverton. Beatrice was in remission from pancreatic cancer then, thin but absolutely lit from the inside with a quiet strength. At Thanksgiving, she didn't stage the dinner. She just pulled me into the kitchen, handed me a knife, and asked me to slice apples for the pie. She looked at me and said, "Owen's been quieter since my diagnosis. He doesn't tell me everything. But you make him talk. Don't ever stop making him talk, will you?" I promised her I wouldn't. And when Conrad said grace, his voice didn't perform for an audience. It was just a man talking to God in his own dining room. Beatrice passed away in March of 2024. The cancer came back with a vengeance, and it took her in 5 months. My mother showed up to the funeral wearing a crisp white blouse and a cream-colored skirt, looking more like she was hosting an open house than attending a wake. But she didn't just bring her presents. On her way out, she quietly slid Beatrice's vintage, square Pyrex casserole dish, the one with the white, floral edging that Beatrice's grandmother had passed down, into a canvas tote bag and walked out the door. She never gave it back. She never mentioned it. I was too consumed by Owen's grief to fight her for a piece of glass. But while I was focusing on building a life, Vanessa was focusing on copying it. It started at our engagement brunch. She congratulated me with her arms tightly crossed, staring at her phone every 2 minutes. 5 months later, at our rehearsal dinner north of Newburgh, Owen went down to the hotel wine cellar at 9:43 p.m. to grab another bottle of Pinot Noir. Vanessa left the table exactly 2 minutes later. She cornered him against the wine racks and kissed him. Owen pushed her off immediately, told her never to look at him again, and out of sheer protection for my sanity, he waited until 6:18 the next morning to tell me the absolute truth while sitting in his pajamas in our rental car. I looked into his eyes, saw his absolute terror of losing me, and I believed him. I married him at 3 o'clock that afternoon. Vanessa gave a flawless, tearful toast at the reception, completely unbothered. What none of us realized then was that Vanessa's obsession didn't die in that wine cellar. It mutated. In October of 2024, she suddenly rushed down the aisle with a finance guy named Drew. I was her matron of honor, and I tried so hard to be happy for her. But during their first dance, a cold shiver went straight down my spine. Drew had styled his hair exactly like Owen. He wore the same navy tie Owen had worn at our rehearsal dinner. He stood at Owen's exact height and worked in the exact same field. Vanessa hadn't found love, she had built a proxy. She had constructed a life out of a man who looked just enough like my husband to keep her delusion alive. Then came the text message in April of 2026. I was 8 months pregnant. The text from my mother was unnaturally soft. Sweetheart, your father and I want to host you on Saturday. Just the four of us. Well, five with Drew. It's time we became one family again. Please come. When I pulled into the driveway that Saturday, the Pacific Northwest rain had just stopped. I walked through the front door, and the table was set with the wedding china my mother only used for special occasions. And right there, in the center of the mahogany table, sat Beatrice's stolen floral Pyrex dish, filled with chicken and rosemary. My mother had weaponized my late mother-in-law's comfort food just to lower my guard. I looked at the mantel and my heart sank. A new photo frame from Easter 2024 was on display. In the original photo, I had been standing proudly between my parents. In this new version, my face was entirely cropped by the silver edge. Vanessa stood at the center. Vanessa walked up to me, pressed her flat stomach against my 8-month pregnant belly, and whispered, too quiet for anyone else to hear, "She's going to be beautiful." I sat down at the foot of the table, my skin crawling, finally realizing that this dinner wasn't a reconciliation. It was an ambush. My mother settled into her chair at the head of the table, her rings clinking against her water glass as she reached out to pat my father's hand. She looked across the polished mahogany straight into my eyes and cleared her throat. "We have something to discuss, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with that rehearsed, soothing melody she used when she was trying to convince a hesitant buyer to overlook a cracked foundation. "As a family." Then Vanessa stood up. She didn't just speak. She performed. For 3 full minutes, she delivered a monologue that had clearly been practiced in front of a mirror. She talked about her husband, Drew, and how they had been trying to conceive since their wedding night. She paused for a single, perfectly timed tear to roll down her cheek right as she mentioned the medical verdicts, the negative tests, and the unanswered prayers. But as I listened, my mind quickly caught the manipulation. She kept saying, "Mom and I kept coming back to this, and Dad and I, completely leaving Drew out of the narrative." She refolded her linen napkin every single time she took a breath. "You have always been the giver in this family, Molly," Vanessa said, extending her hands toward me across the wedding china. "And we are asking you, your sister and your mother, for the most extraordinary gift one sister can ever give another. We want you to give us the baby." The room went completely airless. My mother instantly took over the pitch, using the exact same clinical, breezy tone she used when closing a multi-million-dollar real estate deal. She explained that Vanessa would adopt my daughter quietly through a private arrangement. There would be no messy paperwork for the public to see. I would simply step back and become the baby's aunt, and the child would call Vanessa Mom. "We've already spoken to a close friend at the diocesan office," my mother added, smoothing down her skirt. "It can be done in a way that is incredibly gentle for everyone involved." "You're young, sweetheart. You have plenty of time to have more children with Owen. Your sister doesn't." I sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my mind remained hyper-focused. I caught the slip. The Petons were Methodist. We had been Methodist for 4 generations on my mother's side. Methodists do not have a diocesan office. Vanessa hadn't just been talking to our family. She had been quietly consulting outside our congregation, trying to build a legal trapdoor before I even knew I was in a room. I looked over at Drew. His face was the exact color of dirty dishwater. He was staring intently at the rim of his water glass, his knuckles white. In that flash of clarity, I realized the truth. Drew hadn't engineered this plan. He had been dragged into this dining room like a prop. A generic husband brought in to fulfill the legal requirements of an adoption he hadn't even fully agreed to. I felt a sudden, fleeting wave of pity for him before the sheer anger took over. I set my water glass down on the table with a sharp, deliberate click, I made sure to look my mother dead in the eyes, speaking slowly so that absolutely no one in that room could mishear me. "No," I said. The room went entirely dead still. "The answer is no," I repeated, my voice steady and cold. "It will be no tomorrow. It will be no in a year. I came here to share a family dinner, and I am leaving in exactly 5 minutes. Vanessa, I am truly sorry that you have not been able to conceive. That grief is real, and I won't pretend otherwise. But this baby belongs to me and Owen. She will be ours the day she is born, the day after that, and every single day for the rest of her life. I am never having this conversation again." My father quietly put down his bourbon glass and looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. My mother's face instantly went completely flat. The polite, loving maternal facade she had been performing for the last hour slid off her features like a damp paper napkin. "You owe this family, Molly," she hissed, her hand slamming down onto the edge of Beatrice's stolen casserole dish. "And that baby, she was never just yours." I pushed my chair back to stand up, but I wasn't fast enough. My mother had been waiting 29 years to lift her hand against me, and the exact second was completely incidental. Before I could fully clear the table, her right hand flew up and she slapped me with the exact same palm that had been resting on the warm Pyrex dish a moment before. My head snapped sideways violently. The sheer force of the blow threw my balance completely off, and the next thing I felt was the sharp, varnished oak edge of the table slamming directly into my 8-month pregnant belly. My water glass tipped over, the water pouring across the white cloth as the silver salt cellar rolled away. I instinctively threw both of my arms over my stomach to protect my daughter as gravity violently pulled me sideways. I went down hard on the hardwood floor. The historic planks my grandfather had laid with his own knees back in 1968. As I lay there in the spilled water, the absolute silence of the room was deafening. My father didn't move a muscle to help his pregnant daughter up. He simply reached for the crystal decanter and poured his 5th glass of bourbon, watching the amber liquid catch the light of the chandelier. My sister never stood up. She sat there with her hands folded neatly in her lap, completely composed, waiting to see who would make the next move. Drew took one hesitant step toward me, but Vanessa shot him a look so sharp he instantly froze in his tracks. "Get up," my mother said, her voice returning to that chilling, gentle tone as she looked down at me, crawling on my hands and knees. "You're making an absolute scene." The drive from that suffocating dining room to Providence St. Vincent Medical Center was 12 miles of absolute blur. The triage nurse took one look at the violent 4-finger swell darkening my left cheek and immediately bypassed the standard intake questions. Within 7 minutes, I was wheeled into room 4112, and a cold fetal monitor was pressed against my stomach. When the machine finally filled the room with that steady, rapid rhythm, 138 beats per minute, the air finally returned to my lungs. Iris was safe. Owen ran through the door at 7:38 p.m., dropping to his knees beside the bed, burying his face against my stomach as he wept in a way he hadn't since his mother's funeral. I held the back of his head, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of his shoulders, waiting. At exactly 7:54 p.m., the heavy door clicked open again. Pastor Conrad walked in. He was wearing his formal black clergy collar and carrying a small, weathered brown paper bag. He didn't look like a man about to offer a standard pastoral prayer. He looked like a man about to execute a judgment. He set the bag on the rolling tray table and reached inside, pulling out an old black iPhone 8 with a web of deep cracks stretching across the upper right corner of the screen. "What is that, Dad?" Owen asked, wiping his eyes as he looked at the outdated device. Conrad didn't look at his son. He kept his eyes locked on mine, his expression a mix of profound grief and absolute resolve. "Molly," he said, his voice dropping into that low, steady register he used when sitting at a hospital bedside. "I am going to tell you everything I have known for the last 3 years. And then I am going to ask for your forgiveness for the part I played in keeping it quiet to protect a peace that didn't exist." He sat down in the plastic visitor's chair, holding the cracked phone in both of his calloused hands. "This phone belongs to April of 2023. I haven't turned it on since the night before your wedding, but I charged it in the car on the way over. Molly, at the rehearsal dinner, I went down to that hotel wine cellar at 9:43 p.m. looking for Owen because he had been gone too long. I walk quietly. You know that. I heard Vanessa before I ever saw her. I heard the kiss, and I heard Owen violently push her back against the racks and tell her never again. When Owen ran up the stairs, I stepped into the corridor and caught Vanessa by the arm. I told her that her sister was upstairs in a wedding dress and that she would never breathe a word of this folly again. And that was when she looked at me and said the sentence that forced me to press record." Conrad swiped his thumb across the screen and opened a single video file dated April 28, 2023, at 9:51 p.m. He pressed play. The screen was mostly a dark, grainy void. Conrad had been holding the phone down by his hip, but the audio was chillingly crisp. Vanessa's voice sounded 3 years younger, entirely calm and utterly devoid of the desperate emotion she had performed at the dinner table earlier that evening. "I'm going to have everything she has, Pastor," her recorded voice purred from the speaker. "One way or another, even if I have to wait 10 years. You can tell her if you want, but she won't believe you. Mom won't believe you. She never does." The video cut out. Owen's face went entirely white, his breath catching in his throat. But Conrad wasn't finished. He swiped over to the visual voicemail tab. I kept the phone active but locked in my desk, routing her calls to voicemail. Conrad explained quietly. "Look at the dates, Molly. Look at the timeline of her longing." He pressed the first voicemail dated May 6, 2023. Exactly 1 week after Owen and I had returned from our honeymoon in Big Sur. Vanessa's voice was brisk, sharp, and businesslike. "Pastor Conrad, this is Vanessa. I need to talk to you about Owen. He's making a massive mistake. Please call me back." He pressed the second one, dated December 26, 2023, at 1:32 in the morning. Her words were noticeably slurred, heavy with holiday wine. "Pastor, it's Vanessa. She doesn't deserve him. You know it. I know it. You were the one who pulled me out of that cellar, you remember. Good night, Pastor." The third message played, dated September 14, 2025. Just 4 weeks before her own formal wedding anniversary with Drew. Her voice was a hushed, frantic whisper. "Pastor Conrad, Drew and I have been trying. It hasn't worked. I think about that cellar more than I should. I shouldn't be telling you this. Don't call me back." Then came the final voicemail, dated February 14, 2026. Valentine's Day, a mere 2 months before the ambush dinner. "Pastor Conrad, this is Vanessa," she said, her tone suddenly shifting into a chillingly practical, maternal cadence. "I want to let you know Molly is pregnant. She told everyone at brunch in October, but I didn't want to call you then. Mom and I have a plan. Please don't get in our way. We've been working on this for months. The baby will be safe. Better than safe. She'll be wanted. Goodbye." The audio fell silent, the only sound in room 412 being the clinical, rhythmic beep of the fetal monitor. I looked up toward the doorway, and my heart completely froze. My mother was standing right there in the threshold, holding a plush teddy bear and a pastel get-well card. She had heard the last 40 seconds of the recording, and her hand was actively twitching toward the rolling table, her eyes locked on that glowing, cracked screen. My mother didn't take another step into the room. She stood frozen in the doorway, the pastel get-well card trembling slightly in her hand, her eyes darting between Conrad and the cracked phone screen. Conrad calmly placed his large palm completely flat over the iPhone 8, ensuring she couldn't make a desperate lunge for it. Owen slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his own phone. He looked up at me, his eyes rimmed with red, his jaw set in a hard, tight line. "Molly," he said, his voice dropping into a low, strained whisper. "There's one more thing. I should have told you the moment it started. I kept telling myself I was protecting our peace, but I see now that I wasn't protecting peace at all. I was just protecting her." He unlocked the screen and opened a hidden archive folder labeled simply with the letter V. He held the screen out toward me, unable to read the contents aloud himself. My eyes scanned the digital log. There were exactly 53 messages. The very first text was dated June 2nd, 2023, exactly 6 weeks after our wedding day. "You don't owe her your whole life, Owen. We both know it. V." I scrolled through the history with a numb thumb. The messages didn't arrive in a predictable, daily rhythm. They came in erratic, obsessive clusters. There were 6 during our first 6 months of marriage, then a long, deceptive silence for 9 months. Suddenly, 12 messages appeared in a single frantic week in the spring of 2024. The exact same week Vanessa had publicly announced she was going to start dating Drew. Then, my breath caught on a multimedia file dated September 11th, 2024. It was a photograph Vanessa had taken of herself standing right at the reception desk of Cascade Wealth Advisors, Owen's downtown office. The caption beneath it read, "I came to bring you coffee. You weren't here. The receptionist said you were at a retreat in Tacoma. I miss you." I looked up from the screen, my heart heavy, looking directly into my husband's eyes. "Were you in Tacoma, Owen?" "I was," Owen said, his voice cracking slightly. "I had officially blocked her personal number 2 days before that photo was taken. She must have used a colleague's iPad just to bypass the block and send the image. I never responded, Molly. I swear to you." I lowered my eyes back to the screen and scrolled to the final message, dated March 22nd, 2026. Exactly 27 days before the ambush dinner invitation. "She doesn't deserve to carry her, Owen. I do, V." The absolute clarity of the situation settled into my mind like a heavy stone dropping into deep, still water. My sister had never actually wanted a baby. She had wanted my baby. She had never wanted a generic husband. She had wanted my husband. And when she realized she could never physically possess Owen, she had meticulously built a proxy marriage out of Drew, a man who shared his height, his career, and his appearance. The unborn daughter she had claimed was the longing of her life, was never about healing her own infertility. She wanted the closest possible genetic link to the man she was obsessed with. She wanted a child fathered by Owen, harvested from my body. Right then, the heavy wooden door clicked open, and Drew walked into room 412. He was still wearing the gray Patagonia vest he had worn at the dinner table. His hair was completely unkempt, tossed by the April wind, and his eyes were wild. He stopped dead at the foot of my bed, looking first at the fetal monitor, then at the deep, dark bruise on my cheek, and finally at Conrad. "What is going on here?" Drew asked, his voice raw. "Vanessa has been texting me frantically, but she won't tell me what happened after Molly walked out." Conrad didn't say a word. He simply leaned forward, picked up the cracked iPhone 8, and pressed play on the 23-second recording from the wine cellar corridor. Then, he systematically played the 4 long voicemails in chronological order. When the audio finished, Owen extended his own phone, displaying the 53 messages in the V folder, and handed it directly to Drew. Drew sat perfectly still in the visitor's chair for 4 agonizing minutes. The digital clock on the hospital wall slowly ticked from 8:39 to 8:40, then 8:41, then 8:42. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He just scrolled through the text history, his face draining of all color. Finally, his thumb stopped on a photograph from his own wedding morning. A candid shot he had personally taken of his beautiful bride in her white dress, thinking she was looking at her phone with an expression of pure love. Now, looking closely at the screen reflected in the church vestibule mirror behind her. The text bubble she was actively typing was completely visible. It was addressed to Owen. It read, "I wish it was you instead." Drew spoke for the first time at exactly 8:43 p.m. His voice didn't crack, but it possessed a terrifying, hollow weight. "I took that photo because I thought she looked beautiful," he whispered, staring blankly at the screen. I never read the reflection closely. I assumed she was texting her college roommate Madison, who had canceled 3 days before the ceremony. I am telling you all right now. I am the only person in that church who did not know. His jaw tightened violently on the word only. He stood up slowly, sliding Owen's phone back onto the tray table. He turned his head and looked at my mother for a long, slow count of 5. The sheer disgust in his eyes was absolute. He reached into his vest pocket, pulled out his own car keys, and walked straight out the door without saying goodbye to a single person in that room. The heavy door clicked shut behind him, leaving my mother standing completely isolated against the wall. My mother did not look at me yet. She kept her eyes fixed on the rolling tray table, staring intently at the cracked screen of the iPhone 8 as if she could somehow wish the digital evidence out of existence. Then she slowly turned her face toward me, her features twisting back into that soft, rehearsed expression of maternal concern. "Molly, sweetheart," she began, her voice dropping into a desperate, soothing melody. "I know how that sounded. I know how it all looks. But you have to understand. Your sister was just under so much pressure." "Mom," I cut her off instantly, my voice entirely flat, completely devoid of anger or volume. "The night before my wedding, in the parking lot of the Allison Inn, Vanessa was crying hysterically in the passenger seat of your car. You said exactly one sentence to comfort her. Repeat that sentence for me right now." My mother's left hand instinctively flew up to her ear, her fingers desperately twisting her pearl earring. The exact physical tell I had been watching her perform since I was 12 years old, whenever she was backed into a corner. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Conrad answered the question for her, his voice ringing out like a judgment in the small hospital room. She said, "It should have been you, sweetheart. You saw him first." I was walking back to my own sedan, Janelle. I had the windows of Beatrice's car, cracked because of the spring heat. "I heard you. I heard every single word, and I have carried that sentence in my chest every night for 3 long years." My mother didn't deny it. She dropped her hand from her ear, lowering her gaze to her own manicured fingers. "You knew?" I whispered, the finality of the truth settling into my bones. "You knew the night before my wedding that my sister was actively obsessed with my husband. And you let me walk down that aisle anyway. Not to protect my happiness, and not to preserve the peace. You did it to buy Vanessa time to find a way into his life. You treated my entire marriage like a temporary holding cell until she could harvest what she wanted." She offered no answer. Owen silently pulled out his phone, dialed my father's number, and placed the call directly on speakerphone. "Theodore, it's Owen," he said clearly. "I am putting you on speaker right now. Pastor Conrad is going to summarize exactly what we have been listening to for the past 2 hours, and then I am going to ask you one question." From the speaker, the background noise of my parents' dining room was painfully audible. We could hear the distinct scrape of a heavy chair against the floor, the sharp clink of a bourbon glass hitting the polished wood, and the distant drone of a television commercial. Vanessa was completely gone. She had already fled the house. Conrad calmly delivered the news. He read the dates of the voicemails, summarized the 53 text messages, and described the photograph Vanessa had taken on her own wedding morning with the visible text reflection. He spoke with the clinical, unhurried precision of a pastor delivering a terminal diagnosis at a bedside. My father did not interrupt him once. When Conrad finished, Owen leaned closer to the phone. "Theodore, did you know any of this?" There was a long, agonizing 5-second silence on the line. When my father finally spoke, his voice was entirely broken. "I knew about the cellar," he whispered. "Janelle told me a month after the wedding. I told her to leave it alone. I told her Molly didn't need to know. I am the sole reason Conrad was left completely alone in carrying this weight. I have been an absolute coward, Owen. I have been a coward for your entire life." His voice fractured completely on the word coward. We could hear him taking a ragged breath on the other end of the line. "Janelle?" my father said, his tone turning ice-cold as he addressed his wife through the speaker. "I am checking into the Heathman Hotel tonight. I won't be home tomorrow, and I will send a courier for my things on Monday morning." "I am so sorry, Molly. I am 29 years too late." The line went completely dead. My mother stood frozen for a fraction of a second, the plush teddy bear slipping from her lap and hitting the floor, the pastel card fluttering down beside it. Suddenly, something behind her eyes completely broke loose. She lunged forward, 3 quick, desperate steps straight toward the rolling tray table, her hand claws out, reaching for the cracked iPhone 8. But Owen was already moving. He instantly stepped his broad frame directly between her and the table, blocking her path before she could close the final 2 feet. He didn't touch her, and he didn't raise his voice. He just stood there like an immovable wall. Right then, the heavy door swung open, and Vanessa practically collapsed into the threshold. She was sobbing hysterically, her black mascara running down her pale cheeks in twin streaks. She must have driven frantically from Lake Oswego the moment. My mother texted her from the room, running up the hospital stairs without stopping. She stood there, her hands gripping the doorframe on either side of her head like a defeated child, caught in a lie. She looked at the phones, looked at me, and uttered the only words she would say in that room. "Turn it off. Please, just turn it off." I didn't say a word, and I didn't need to. Vanessa slowly slid down the doorframe, sinking into a heap on the linoleum floor of room 412. I looked at them both, feeling an incredible, washing wave of absolute detachment. "Mom, Vanessa. Go home," I said, my voice completely quiet, cutting through the weeping. "Not to my house. To wherever it is you live now. Never call my number again, and do not ever show up at my front door. If you attempt to come to this hospital when my daughter is born, I will have security remove you immediately. I am not going to say a formal goodbye to either of you, because a goodbye implies I want a reunion. Get out." My mother turned around and walked out without looking back. Vanessa remained on the floor for another agonizing minute, sobbing into her knees, before she finally gathered herself and followed her mother down the long corridor. The pastel card remained empty on the visitor's chair. The teddy bear stayed abandoned on the linoleum floor. The vintage casserole dish remained sitting in the dark dining room of a house I would never set foot in again for the rest of my life. Drew filed for a total contested divorce on the 4th of May, refusing to argue over a single joint asset, taking only the clothes and items he had brought into the marriage, and completely vanishing from Vanessa's life forever. My father stayed at the Heathman Hotel for 9 days before moving into a small, furnished corporate apartment in the Pearl District. He left me 3 long voicemails during his first week there. I didn't delete them, but I didn't return them either. I am keeping them in a secure folder on my cloud drive, so that one day, if Iris ever asks, I will be able to show her exactly what a genuine apology that arrives far too late actually sounds like. On the second Saturday of May, my father drove out to West Lynne alone. He didn't knock on our door. He simply left Beatrice's vintage floral Pyrex casserole dish on our front porch inside a brown cardboard box with a short handwritten note taped to the lid that read, "This was never ours." I thoroughly washed the glass, packed it back into a pristine box, and drove it out to Beaverton, returning it directly to Conrad's kitchen counter where it had lived for 40 years. He stood in front of it for a very long time without speaking a word, and he didn't need to. On the 18th of May, the nursery was finally finished. Soft, warm cream walls, a beautiful single rocking chair that Conrad had personally stripped and refinished himself. A heavy maple rocker with a cream cushion that Beatrice's sister had sewn years before. It had been Beatrice's chair. She had rocked Owen to sleep in it when he was a baby. I sat in it for the very first time on the evening of May 20th, and the baby kicked so hard I could feel the vibration right against the solid wood. Right above the changing table, Owen had quietly hung a new frame containing my 15-year-old regional writing prize certificate, the one that had stayed folded in the bottom of a dark drawer for 14 long years. My water broke on the evening of May 24th at exactly 6 minutes past 6 o'clock. Owen drove me to Providence St. Vincent, and Dr. Holloway delivered Iris Beatrice Bryan at 11 minutes past 8 that night. She weighed 5 pounds, 14 ounces. She was late preterm, perfectly pink, breathing entirely on her own, and crying with that fierce, beautiful strength that babies have when they have decided they are completely ready to be here. Owen caught her, cut the cord himself, and held her against his bare chest while they cleaned her. Then, he walked her out into the quiet hallway where Conrad was sitting in a plastic chair with his hands resting on his knees, and he laid her directly into his father's arms. "Dad," Owen whispered, "this is your granddaughter." Conrad wept in a way I had never seen a man weep before. Not at his wife's diagnosis, not at her funeral, and not at any milestone we had ever shared. He held that tiny blanketed bundle close to his chest and whispered his late wife's name directly into her hair. On the 27th of May, I posted a single, private photograph online to an account with only 31 carefully chosen followers. It was a picture of a tiny, perfect foot resting against a cream blanket. No faces, no identifiers. The caption read, "Iris Beatrice Bryan, May 24th, 2026. She knows the people who waited for her. The rest are not invited." My mother saw the post through an extended family chain, but she has never called me since. Vanessa sent an 11-page, handwritten letter that arrived in our mailbox 2 days later, which Owen quietly laid on our kitchen island. I didn't open it. I built a small fire in our hearth that night and watched the pages turn to ash while Owen sat beside me in absolute, peaceful silence. If you have ever been told by the people who raised you that your own pain, your own boundaries, and your own life didn't matter, because someone else in the family needed it more, I want you to hear me clearly right now. Iris will grow up knowing my mother's name, but she will never ever grow up calling her grandmother. That distinction took me 29 agonizing years to earn, and I am never letting a single soul take it away from me again. Some families are not your real family. They are simply the geographical location you had to escape from to become human. The family you build, the one that waits anxiously in a hospital hallway, with their hands on their knees, the one that drives across town with an old phone full of evidence, The one that catches your daughter and lays her safely in her grandfather's arms. That is the family that counts. Iris is sleeping deeply in my arms right now as the morning sun comes up over the Willamette Valley outside her nursery window. She has Owen's long hands, and she has Beatrice's bright eyes. The vintage casserole dish sits safely back on Conrad's counter where it always belonged. I had to fall hard on a historic floor my grandfather laid back in 1968 to find my true home. And if I had to, I would do it all over again,